I'm Harper, 31 years old, lead architect at one of the top sustainable design firms in Seattle. But before anyone assumes I was born for success, let me tell you something no one in my family has ever admitted. I was the extra. I grew up in a 3-story mansion overlooking Lake Sammamish, where everything was calculated. Each piece of furniture, every sentence at dinner, even the expression you wore when guests walked in. My father, Walter Whitman, was a prominent steel magnate in the Pacific Northwest. He believed in hard work, discipline, and tradition, and that a man's legacy could only be continued by other men. My mother, Claire, used to be a literature professor at the local university. Gentle, reserved, and slowly retreating from the world after giving birth to her 3rd child. By the time I was 8, I already knew I wasn't anyone's priority. It was a Sunday evening. I sat at the long walnut table draped in white linen, listening as my father discussed supply chains across 3 states with my 2 brothers, 12-year-old Brandon and 15-year-old Scott. I had just learned the term working capital, and asked confidently, "Dad, if the company holds too much inventory, does that affect working capital?" He looked up, eyes cold as stone. "Harper, go help your mother with dessert. This is business talk, not for girls." My mom paused mid-pour. I swallowed the rest of my question and left the table. My steps echoed against the glossy tile floor, and in that moment I understood I didn't belong at that table. Not ever. My father started with nothing. A small loan from his uncle and sheer willpower built Whitman's Steel out of a rundown plant in Spokane. By the time he was 40, his holdings stretched from Oregon to Idaho. In interviews, he'd repeat the same phrase like gospel. A man builds. A man carries. A man leaves his name behind. Women were never part of that narrative. I was the 3rd child and the only daughter. From my earliest memories, my father molded Brandon and Scott into successors. When Scott got a model manufacturing kit at age 10, I asked for an architecture kit. My father glanced at the box and sneered. "You like those dollhouses for artsy types, huh?" I responded by building a miniature neighborhood from my favorite movie. My mom took a photo of me sitting in the middle of it, eyes glowing. That picture never made it onto the wall like the ones of my brothers. I outperformed both Brandon and Scott combined. Valedictorian of my high school class. Perfect math scores. Statewide design award at 17. When I got my acceptance letter and full scholarship to Cal Poly's prestigious architecture program, I stepped into my father's study, heart pounding like a drumline. He looked up from his paperwork and waited for me to finish. "Architecture? Around here we call that decorative play. No Whitman makes a living off sketches." I remember how that line hit, like someone threw ice water in my face, then walked away like nothing happened. I crumpled the letter in my sweaty palm. I went to Cal Poly anyway. My father refused to help with tuition, said if I had a scholarship I could prove I could handle the rest. Meanwhile, Brandon and Scott went to state schools with full financial support, cars, and monthly stipends. That first year I studied and worked at the campus bookstore. Every night I returned to the dorm, surrounded by blueprints and models, quietly building spaces no one had ever seen. No one from home called. In the first 3 years of college, my father sent exactly one message. "Don't disappoint yourself chasing illusions." I didn't reply. I also didn't forget. My mom died of lung cancer during my junior year. At the funeral, while people whispered around the casket, I overheard my father tell my uncle, "At least Brandon and Scott are here to carry things forward." I was standing less than 2 steps away, holding my mother's portrait. No one looked at me. I didn't bother looking at them. I'm not sure what hurt more in that moment, losing my mother or realizing my father would never see me. I made a promise to myself that day. If I built something, no one could take it from me, not even him. I don't remember exactly when that spring began. I only remember that when the cherry blossoms outside the school bloomed, I was standing on stage at the Washington State Student Hall, accepting the gold medal for my climate-resilient housing project, a science fair model I had designed, researched, and built over 3 relentless months. My mom sat in the second row. Her hair had thinned, but her smile lit up like she was under a stage light. She waved at me as I glanced down. The seat beside her was empty. My father didn't come. I remember the text he sent 2 hours before the ceremony. "Scott has a basketball game at school. You know he needs the support." Scott was benched that day. Never even stepped onto the court. But my dad sat through the whole game according to Mom. After the ceremony, I sat alone, still wearing my school blazer with the name tag pinned to my chest, staring at the medal that felt heavier than metal. Not because of what it was made of, but because of the space where my father's pride should have been. I quietly slipped it into my pocket. Didn't say anything to my mother. Didn't cry. She placed a hand gently on my shoulder as we reached the car. "You could build a whole city from what you're designing," she whispered, voice trembling like leaves brushing against a windshield. "Your father just doesn't see it." When I turned 21, she was gone. The funeral took place on a gray Wednesday with mist falling lightly. The white church on the hill smelled of lilies, cold and clean, seeping into every pleat of every black dress. I didn't cry. I was afraid if I did, I'd collapse right there. As people waited for the casket to be taken out, I stood near the aisle holding my mother's portrait, watching guests filter out row by row. Behind me, I heard my father's voice, steady, not hushed. "Well, at least Brandon and Scott are still here. They can continue what we've built." I froze. Not because I was hurt, but because I realized I didn't exist in his story. I wasn't even a footnote. Even though I was the only one who went to college out of state. The only one who built models in the rain. The only one who knew Mom wanted to open a free library for rural kids and never got to. I turned. Looked at him. He didn't return the glance. He was shaking hands with someone else, that familiar half-smile on his face like this was just a somber networking event. My great-aunt whispered, "Walter's just grieving, dear." But she didn't know. This wasn't the first time he'd made me disappear in plain sight. My graduation from MIT was on a sunny June day. I was chosen to give the commencement speech for the School of Architecture, an honor reserved for top students with outstanding projects. As I stood at the podium, sunlight pouring through the soaring glass ceiling, casting long lines on the white stone floor, his seat in the audience remained empty. I waited. Some part of me still imagined him showing up at the last second like a scene from a movie. But he didn't. My mother was gone. And my father? He chose to attend a lunch meeting with Brandon's business contact. Not even a negotiation. Just a meal with a regional manager from a distribution firm that Whitman Steel had partnered with the year before. He showed up exactly 30 minutes after I finished speaking. Wearing a navy suit, gray tie, and holding a Starbucks cup. Bet that felt good. "Let's take a few photos, I have to go. Brandon's waiting out by the car." I just nodded, holding a polite smile for the photo my aunt took. In the picture, I stood under the summer sunlight with my diploma in hand, and he stood next to me like he didn't want to touch my shoulder. That photo was never hung in his living room. 3 moments. 3 cuts. Not deep but lingering. They didn't make me cry. They made me quiet. Not angry. Not bitter. Just, after that, I stopped telling him what I was doing. I stopped waiting. And I began to understand that not all relationships break from a single event. Some just erode over time until there's nothing left to hold on to. I went on to pursue a master's degree, then moved to Seattle to work for an architecture firm focused on sustainable development. No one in my family asked where I was living. No one knew I was invited to speak at an international conference in Berlin. I didn't tell them. I had learned how silence can feel like a kind of freedom. There was only one thing I couldn't bring myself to do: erase his name from the first design I ever drew. That sketch still sits in the drawer of my home desk. In the bottom corner, there's a line written in pencil from back when I was a 10th grader. "If one day he sees this, I hope he understands." He just never looked, or never wanted to. I've never forgotten the moment my father sent a 4-line email after I received an offer to join Ashland Plus Reed, a renowned architecture firm. Will that company even last another 3 years? A job is still just a job. The doors of Whitman Steel are always open. Come back when you're ready to do real work. I didn't reply. I was busy choosing which design to submit for project review in Portland. Ashland Plus Reed isn't a place you survive without skill. The office is on the 26th floor of a glass tower near the Fremont Bridge, where every morning the fog reflects on the concrete blocks like the city is being rebuilt all over again. I started in technical design, doing all the small, tedious tasks. Re-rendering school farm plans, editing roofing details for a senior living center. My weeks revolved around deadlines, cold coffee, and office lights still on at 11 p.m. But little by little, my drafts stopped getting sent back more than 3 times. Then not at all. Then they started being used for client presentations. The third project I led was an eco-commercial complex in Boise. I used recycled glass, solar panel roofing, and oriented the structure to match local wind flow to reduce AC needs. People called it architecture that breathes with the environment. The design press used that phrase to describe me for years afterward. By my fourth year, I was invited to speak at the National Design Conference in Denver as a lead coordinator. During the reception that night, while I was chatting with a group of young architects from New Orleans, a woman approached me, platinum hair tied neatly, charcoal gray tailored suit. "You're Harper Whitman?" "I'm Diane Reed, co-managing partner of Ashland Plus Reed. I've followed your work since Boise." 1 week later, I was added to the senior leadership development track. The next 14 months were a non-stop series of trials. Team leadership, meetings with city officials defending budget proposals to investors. I gave up most of my annual leave to oversee the renovation of a public square in Spokane, the same one where I used to go to summer markets with my mom as a child. Now I was redesigning it. At 30, I became the youngest partner in Ashland Plus Reed's 52-year history. The news made the back cover of Pacific Architect. They used a photo of me standing in front of the South Shore Seattle Community Center plans. Blue sky behind me, dark coat on, hair tied up. The headline read, "Harper Whitman, Engineer of Space, Designer of Renewal." The magazine was sent to nearly every architectural and structural engineering office in the region. Neither Brandon nor Scott called. A week later, I got a text from my father. "Looks fine. Dark coat makes you look more professional than usual. By the way, can you spare some time to review Brandon's plans?" I didn't respond. Every time I'm recognized, every keynote I'm asked to give, I think, if it were Brandon, my father would have hosted a dinner. If it were Scott, the entire Whitman Steel board would get an email titled "Proud Update." But for me, just looks fine. I didn't send anything to him. I stopped sharing. Not out of spite. I simply redirected my energy to places where it could grow. Designs, communities, my team, and buildings that bring light to forgotten neighborhoods. My account was big enough to buy a lakefront apartment by Lake Union, paid in full. But I didn't throw a housewarming party. I placed the cardboard and colored paper green roof house model I made in my freshman year on the top shelf in my living room. That was the only reminder I needed. Not everyone will see you grow. What matters is that you see how far you've come. I have everything I once dreamed of: recognition, industry credibility, creative freedom, and the power to choose. Some mornings on the balcony, watching sunlight ripple on the water, I wonder, if I had been a son, would he be sitting here beside me? Maybe. But I no longer bind myself to that question. Years later, I was invited to join the National Eco-Housing Advisory Board. I was the youngest nominee on the list. At the time, I was sitting in the glass-walled office on the 43rd floor of a newly built tower. My design, my name engraved under its foundation. A text came from my father's number. "Scott just restructured the sales division. Might need input on modern office space. Can you advise?" I locked my phone. No reaction. Because not every call needs to be answered. Not every door needs to reopen, especially when you've already built your own path. One that's steadier, brighter, and fully your own. The invitation card was printed on pearl laminated paper, silver foil edging. The embossed words shimmered under the kitchen light. "Retirement celebration for Walter Whitman, commemorating 40 years of leadership at Whitman Steel." Venue: Carlton Grand Hotel, downtown. Dress code: black tie optional. I set the card down next to my cooling espresso and stared at the handwritten name below. Harper L. Whitman. Not, "My daughter Harper." Not "Dearest." Just a name like any other guest. "You going?" Jonah asked, placing a hand on the back of the chair across from me. He's been my boyfriend for 2 years. A physical therapist. The one who stayed up with me when I had to redraw plans after last-minute investor changes. The one who made me noodles when I lost my mom. The only person who ever asked, "Did he ever truly care about you?" "I think I should go," I answered, still looking at the card. Not for him, but maybe to close something. I wasn't asked to help plan the event. But 2 days before, Brandon emailed saying, "If it's not too much trouble, could you send some old photos for the tribute video?" I stayed up late rummaging through old boxes. Dad holding my bike at age 4. Me and Mom sitting with my handmade wooden house model in middle school. Him smiling faintly when I won the state student architecture prize. I sent them along with a short note. He built with steel. I build with light. Different paths but from the same starting point. Willpower. I know he probably won't read it. But I still wrote it. That evening the Carlton Grand glowed under chandelier light, casting a golden sheen over black and charcoal suits moving across the grand lobby. Men shook hands with predictable smiles, women held champagne glasses and whispered to one another, "Walter is a man who made history." I arrived right on time. Not late, not early. A young staff member escorted me to table 19 near the wings. Around me were a few distant relatives, a retired maintenance worker and his wife. I sat down. The midnight purple high-neck dress brushed softly against the velvet armrest, my small black purse resting next to a glass of ice water. In the distance, the central table flickered with candlelight. My father sat between Brandon and Scott, their wives on either side. The only empty seat there was reserved for a Japanese partner, still absent. The distance between us wasn't just the rows of tables. It was the quiet space we'd both built over the last 10 years. The soft jazz faded as the formal ceremony began. Lights dimmed. A large screen lowered from the ceiling. Warm background music rose, then the tribute video began. Young Walter, hard hat on, shaking hands with the state governor. Walter cutting the ribbon at the 6th plant. Walter beside Brandon and Scott at graduation. Walter patting Scott's back at the launch of a new production line. Brandon speaking at the Dallas branch's ribbon cutting. I appeared in exactly one frame, a family photo in front of a Christmas tree. I was around 9, standing far off to the side, hair awkwardly chopped short. No graduation photo. No project shots. Not a single word mentioned me. When the lights came back on, I froze for a few seconds, not from the brightness but from the feeling of being erased from a story I had lived in. Scott stepped onto the stage, followed by Brandon. They delivered a speech packed with words like legacy, core values. Our father's vision shaped who we are today. Then my father took the stage. His posture was upright. He adjusted the mic with 2 fingers. I knew that gesture. It meant he was about to say something he believed to be undeniable. Thank you to all friends, colleagues, and family, he began, eyes sweeping the ballroom. I couldn't have had these 40 years without those who stood by me. He looked toward his sons. Brandon, who streamlined our entire supply chain system. Scott, who took the company into the Canadian market at just the right time. You both are the embodiment of the values I believe in. He paused. His gaze shifted to the back of the ballroom, toward where I sat. Of course, not everyone is meant for the business world. Some people, no matter their education or accolades, simply lack the grit to face reality. No one laughed. But I heard the faint clink of a glass tapping a plate. And that isn't wrong, he went on. We each have our path. It's just that some paths don't build a legacy. I set my fork down. Felt like someone had dumped ice water down the back of my neck. I didn't turn away. I didn't lower my head. I just sat still. Next to me, a second cousin awkwardly scratched his neck. The server refilling our water said nothing but glanced at me with a look that was half sympathy, half avoidance. It wasn't a surprise blow. I'd heard him say these things to others. But never to my face. Not in front of 200 people. On a stage. With a mic amplifying every breath. I felt the small black purse at my side, its leather cool against my wrist. Inside was a small box, wrapped in dark silver paper with a deep violet bow. I'd planned to keep it. But this moment pushed past the limits of silence. I picked up the box. All eyes turned, like a rising wave. My dress skimmed the carpet as I crossed the hall, step by steady step. My father's expression shifted, from surprise to caution. Brandon leaned forward slightly, but Scott held his arm. I wasn't shaking. I'd pitched designs under time and budget pressure before investment boards. A ballroom full of people couldn't faze me. I walked straight to the stage, smiled politely, looked him in the eye. Happy retirement, Dad, I said, placing the gift box in his hand. A present from the daughter, without grit. I turned before he could say anything. No eyes dared stop me. No applause followed. Just absolute stillness behind me, and the echo of my heels in a silence stretched tight as wire. As I stepped off the stage, each footfall in the marble hall sounded like metal hitting stone. I didn't look back. Didn't glance at anyone. Didn't wait for a reaction. I kept my chin high and walked out of the frame where my name had never been allowed. When the grand door closed behind me, I exhaled. The scent of perfume in the banquet room was replaced by the polished wood and leather of the hallway. I strode quickly to the parking garage. My fingers on the key still cold like they'd touched ice. I drove home in absolute silence. The radio off. City lights blurring past the window. At the third red light, I broke down crying. Not from pain, but because the weight of silence had finally reached its peak. I sobbed like someone who had just exhaled a disease that had been trapped in their chest for years. I hadn't planned on anyone seeing me like that. But Jonah was already at the apartment. He opened the door before I could even punch in the code. His eyes met mine and he didn't need to ask. I walked in, buried my face in his shoulder, and let go of the image I'd always tried to keep. "What did you give him?" Jonah asked after pouring me a glass of water. I didn't answer right away. I pulled the small bag down from the shelf, opened my laptop, and took out a duplicate of the USB from the gift box. I placed it in his hand. "This video. It's called, What You Missed." The other USB was still inside that silver box, somewhere in the grand hall of the Carlton Grand Hotel. Inside the box were my Cal Poly degree with honors, my Washington State architectural license, an International Sustainability Award from UN Habitat, 3 articles from trade journals detailing how I applied regenerative design to low-income housing, a financial statement showing I was the second largest stakeholder in Ashland Plus Reed. And on top of it all, there was a letter. I found it in my mother's safe, where she used to hide her precious things. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the handwriting remained smooth and clear. "My dearest Harper, it will take time for you to understand that your worth doesn't require anyone's validation. But if you ever forget, please read these lines. You are the brightest light in the home I ever knew. You didn't break tradition. You charted a new course. Your father didn't see it. But I did. Every day." I placed that letter on top of everything else. I didn't fold it. On the card, I wrote one line by hand in purple ink. "From your biggest failure." I didn't wait for him to open it. But I knew he would, because I'm Walter Whitman's daughter. And Walter Whitman can't stand not being in control of what everyone sees. When I left the Carlton Grand, the ballroom still seated over 100 people. All eyes were on my father. The silver box lay motionless in his hands, light, but heavy like lead. No one dared to move. Scott watched him quietly. Brandon bowed his head. The department heads looked uncertain. My father drew a slow breath, untied the purple ribbon, and opened the lid. The first thing revealed was my diploma. My name clear with summa cum laude stamped across the bottom. Next came the Hammond Award replica. Then the journal articles and photos of my projects across 3 states. He held each item in both hands, inspecting them like foreign artifacts. He froze when he reached the handwritten letter. I don't know who recognized my mother's handwriting, but when he put it down, his hand trembled, like someone just squeezed the hand of a man used to power. On the last page was a photo of me standing in a Tacoma low-income housing project. My design had cut electricity use by over 40%. Sunlight fell across my shoulder, residents gathered around, a child held my finger in the foreground. Architecture made not of steel but of trust. He looked at everything in the box, then bowed his head. No speech followed. No closing remarks. No continuation of the celebration. The man who once silenced rooms with a sentence was now silenced himself. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Brandon. "Dad opened the box right after you left." Everyone saw. Then from Scott. "He hasn't spoken since last night. Still in his office." I deleted both messages. Didn't reply. I didn't need anyone to explain him. No one needed to excuse that he wasn't good at showing emotion. When a man is skilled enough with words to run an empire, never using them to acknowledge his daughter isn't clumsiness, it's a choice. That night I replayed the video, What You Missed. The final scene was my mother at my Cal Poly speech, her eyes sparkling as I said, "We build not just with materials but with meaning. A building might stand through a storm, but only a place with soul stands in people's hearts." My mother stood and applauded first. I didn't need another speech from him after that. I had that applause. That was enough. On Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed at 2:13 a.m. The screen lit up in the dark with an email from my father's personal account. Subject: I was wrong. Body: I watched everything. Can we talk when you're ready? No explanation. No excuse. No signature. I set the phone on the nightstand without opening it. My heart didn't race, not because I'm used to silence, but because this was too late. Like a train leaving a station without passengers. 3 days later, I got a text from Scott. He's watched the USB video almost every night. He can't sleep. Then from Brandon, Dad canceled his retirement trip around Florida. He's staying home. Not answering the board. I didn't reply. I was preparing for a trip to San Francisco, where I'm consulting on an old port redevelopment into an eco-housing complex. Work waits for no one. And anger never stays in its original form. What I didn't expect was Walter Whitman's name in the architecture news late Thursday. Headline on Pacific Design Wire: Whitman Steel launches Sustainable Architecture Division. Walter Whitman delays retirement to direct it. I nearly dropped my coffee when I read. This decision was inspired by innovations in ecological design that Mr. Whitman described as undervalued in the traditional industrial model. The company will collaborate with independent architects to develop standards for renewable energy application and community design. Jonah was standing behind me in the kitchen, reading over my shoulder. He asked, voice uncertain, "Is he really shifting?" I didn't answer. I only stared at the last line. Whitman Steel is negotiating with 3 green design consultancies to pilot projects in former plants in Oregon, Montana, and Utah. That afternoon, Brandon called my office. I answered, because curiosity overtook reason. He asked, "Got a minute? I'm in the middle of Riverside residential plans." "What's up?" "He's not okay, Harper. He's reading green building books like a freshman. Not eating, barely sleeping. Every time we walk in, he replays your Tacoma speech." I stayed silent. He continued, "We didn't call to defend him. Just, you should know he's changing. Maybe not because of you. But it's not about him anymore." I hung up, no promises. 2 weeks later, back from San Francisco, I found a package at my door. No return address. No letter. Just a roll of plans tied with a black ribbon and a small handwritten note. "If you find the time, please read." I opened the roll on my kitchen table. It was a preliminary sketch for a community center in Millhaven, my mother's hometown, where he once declared there was nothing left to return to. Next to it lay a handwritten note in his own script. "Harper, I've spent my whole life with industrial blueprints and lifeless steel structures. But now I'm not so sure I ever truly understood the blueprint of a person, of the daughter I once refused to see." That box wasn't just accomplishments. It was 2 decades of buried silence resurfacing. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to build something that you'd want your name on too. This community center sits where your mother once taught English, the place I once refused to return to, too poor, too outdated. If you're still reading, then I know there's hope. I finished reading, folded the letter, and sat down. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator. No overwhelming feeling. Not happiness, not pity. Just a kind of recognition, like standing before a condemned building and realizing it might still be restored, if the foundation holds its form. I didn't call. I sent a 1-line email. "Meet at Lakeview Cafe. Wednesday 10 Lakeview Cafe sits along a park strip facing Lake Michigan, where the trees were blazing red with fall, clinging to every stone step. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with a clear view of the rippling water. Beside my still steaming cappuccino, I laid out the preliminary design my father had sent. No assistant announced his arrival. No heavy footsteps like before. Just a long shadow stretched across the glass door. When he stepped inside, it took me a second to recognize him. His hair was nearly all white. The gray coat lacked the stiff shoulder pads from his CEO days. No tie. "Hi, Harper," he said, lowering himself slowly into the seat across from me. I gave a small nod. "Black coffee, if you don't mind." Once the waiter left, he opened a worn brown leather bag and pulled out a full set of printed design plans, far more detailed than the draft I'd received by mail. I didn't speak. Every movement of his was deliberate, like he was presenting to a board whose vote could eliminate him on the spot. I know the draft's still rough, but I've been researching recycled materials, airflow planning, natural lighting. I opened the blueprint set, flipping page by page. Notes in blue ink were scattered throughout. Skylight. Ask Harper what height's ideal? Roofing material, composite tile or bio-coated metal? Slope grade in community room, can it be optimized? I couldn't hide the flicker of surprise. He had actually studied. Not a superficial cram session, but the kind of learning people do when they realize the world's been moving outside their window all along. I used to think only concrete could hold weight, he said after a long pause. Turns out I may have been wrong about a lot of things. I set my hand on the plans. The interior walkways need reworking. The bridge connecting the cultural and academic wings will bottleneck during major events. Also, the green roof. If you build it like this, it'll ice over in winter. He wrote down everything. Didn't interrupt. Didn't counter. Didn't pretend he already knew. Would you be willing to lead the project? I'll step back, just want it done right. I don't take on things out of sympathy. If I do this, I'm lead architect. Every decision on structure and aesthetics runs through me. Agreed, he nodded immediately. This is your project. I just want to contribute the right way. I folded the plans, took a sip of cooling coffee. I'll go over the details this week. If anything needs adjusting, I'll send a revised version. Thank you, Harper. I looked at him, really looked, for the first time in years without the bulletproof glass of resentment or disappointment between us. I'm doing this for Mom. She used to say that town deserved a second chance. I think it's time to keep that promise. Over the next 3 months, the Millhaven project became the largest independent job I'd taken outside Ashland plus Reed. I redesigned the facade entirely, added solar-facing sloped roofs, carved out skylight shafts to guide natural light, and integrated vertical gardens for dust filtration in the learning zones. He never interfered. Came to every meeting with handwritten notes, always sat across from me quietly listening. Sometimes he'd ask, will eucalyptus paneling dampen sound as well as walnut? If we expand open space, does it hurt thermal retention? I answered directly. No softening. No flattery. He never acted annoyed or defensive. Once, while we stood at the Millhaven construction site, formerly an old municipal warehouse, he looked up at scaffolding made of recycled steel and said softly, I used to build factories out of steel. Now you use sunlight and greenery to build hope. I didn't respond. But I didn't walk away either. One Saturday night, Brandon called. He's different, Harper. Like someone took the armor off his back. I don't need updates on my father's emotional evolution. No, but you should know, he reread Mom's letter the other night. In his office. He cried. I hung up, but this time didn't delete the message. When the final design received approval, the city council sent a thank you letter. One part was handwritten in black ink. Thank you for bringing green back to Millhaven. But more than that, thank you for helping a father see his daughter, without needing a spotlight. I read it, folded it, and tucked it beside the first sketch I ever drew at 15. You can't undo the past. But if someone's willing to dismantle the old frame that built the wall between you, maybe that's worth calling a starting point. The final plans for Millhaven's community center were approved on a breezy Wednesday afternoon. I printed them on A1 sheets, rolled each one carefully, and brought them down to the project office, where my father sat alone at a temporary wooden desk. He wore reading glasses, marking up technical notes on the materials board. I set the design tube in front of him. Final design. Everything's been updated based on the planning department, the school board, and the local residents' requests. He took off his glasses and nodded. I've invited the solar consulting team to Millhaven next week. They've got some suggestions for the west roof you might want to review. I was surprised by his tone. It didn't have the stiff, formal air of a keynote speaker. It wasn't directive. It sounded like genuine collaboration. I glanced at the board behind him. A large hand-drawn chart showing monthly temperatures, humidity levels, and rainfall in Millhaven. Next to it was a scanned article about a renowned Norwegian ecologist. You're taking an environmental architecture class? I asked. Night classes at the State Institute of Technology. You can laugh. I've turned in late assignments 3 times, still not used to building 3D models. I didn't laugh. but my mouth softened. Partly amused. Partly because I no longer had a reason to push back against the shift that was clearly happening right in front of me. At the press conference the following month, he sat in the second row while I led the entire presentation. When a reporter asked about his role in the project, he didn't hesitate. "I'm here to learn. Harper is the designer, the leader, and the decision maker. My role is to listen." That sentence echoed in the room like a new melody breaking through an old symphony. No one expected Walter Whitman, who once dismissed design, to call his daughter the leader. But he said it. Purry. In front of the cameras. That night, I received a message from Brandon. He had the first Millhaven print framed. "It's hanging in his office." I didn't reply. But I didn't delete the message either. The groundbreaking was scheduled for the third week of September. The new building would stand on the grounds of what used to be a public library, abandoned for over a decade. Dad proposed naming the center the Margaret Whitman Community Center. I didn't object. "She believed in education more than anyone I've known," he said during one of the prep meetings. "And she believed in you when I didn't." I nodded. Not out of agreement, but because sometimes the right things need to be said by the right person. The ceremony began at exactly 10 a.m. On a temporary stage built from recycled wood, the center's name plaque was covered in white cloth. Down on the field, town officials, the press, nonprofits, and Millhaven residents filled every seat. Dad stepped up first. No speech. Just one line. "The one who should speak today is Harper." Then he stepped back, giving me space. I stood beneath the breeze sweeping through the trees behind us, looking out at the expectant faces below. Many strangers. But a few had once shaken my mother's hand when she was still teaching here. Every building tells a story. Some exist only to serve a function. Others stand tall because they carry spirit. This center will be one of those places, I said, eyes steady on the front row where my father sat silent. This isn't just a space for learning, gathering, or care. It stands for what we nearly forgot. The power to make things right, the chance to change, and the value of seeing potential where no one else bothered to look. I paused. Let the air and my gaze settle where they were meant to. This story isn't written in concrete. It's written in trust. People rose to their feet. Applause filled the field. Behind me, my father stood tall. Eyes forward. No bowing. But there was no shield in his gaze. No control. No pride. Just a man standing in the shadow of a daughter he once refused to name. After the ceremony, as the crowd thinned, he approached with a small wooden box. "Your mom kept this in the back of the bookshelf. Brandon found it last week." I opened it. Inside was a small model house I'd made in 6th grade. Popsicle sticks and cardboard, a roof with foil solar panels, windows with thin sheets of plastic. On the side wall, in messy pencil, it read, "A home for those who have none." I ran my fingers across the rough surface. Met his eyes. He didn't look away. "She always believed you saw what others missed," he said. I nodded. Just a little. Then I slipped the model into my bag. Carefully, like an unfinished blueprint. Not because it needed protection, but because now it needed preserving. Not out of nostalgia, but out of respect. The kind of respect two people, once unable to look at each other for 10 seconds, could finally share. Standing together on a piece of land once forgotten. Harper had once been the name left off every compliment, every family photo, and every legacy plan. But instead of begging to be included, she built value through resilience, skill, and quiet determination. Through the hurt, she chose to answer with action, with work that sparked real change. In the end, she didn't just make her father see her, she taught him how to listen. Harper's journey proves one thing: the greatest validation comes from the life you shape for yourself. What do you think about Harper's story? Would you forgive if you were in her place? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful stories about family, forgiveness, and strength.